Does your router have a USB port on it? If so, do you know how to use it? What I've found is that most people, even if their router has a USB port, they aren't using it. So in this episode from Network from Home, I'm going to be explaining to you why your router has a USB port, and then I'll also talk about what you can actually use it for. Let me start off by saying that most newer routers today don't even have USB ports. However, if your router is more than a few years old or it's a little bit older, chances are it will have one. If you're not sure if your router has a USB port or not, all you have to do is take a look at the device itself. Usually it's on the back of the device. As you can see over here, right here is the USB port. It will look something like this. I'm sure you all recognize the USB port at this point, so just double check and make sure to see if your router has one or not. Now that we've confirmed that your router has a USB port, or it doesn't have a USB port, let's talk about what these USB ports were meant to be used for. One common use of these USB ports back in the day was to provide your home network with a networked printer that they could use. Most printers at the time didn't have Wi-Fi capabilities, so they just simply connected the printer to the router with a USB cable, and then any devices on that home network could print off that printer. Of course, printer technology has evolved quite a bit over the years, so now all printers, you can print off of them wirelessly. You don't need to connect them to your router with a USB cable in order to provide a networked printing capability to your home. If you have an older printer that doesn't have wireless capabilities, this is still in play. Feel free to connect your printer to your router with a USB cable, and then any device that's connected to your home network should be able to communicate with and print on that printer. So that functionality might not be totally useful to too many people. Let's talk about another use case. The other use case for a USB port was to actually provide firmware updates to your router. What you do is you take the update to your router's firmware, you put it on a USB stick, the USB goes into the back of your router, and then you could update your router that way. This is another feature that's evolved over the years because now in most cases you can update your router with a mobile device, or you can use a laptop, connect it to your router, access your router settings, and then download an update that way. In some cases with newer routers, you can even set your router to update automatically, so your router will periodically check for updates and automatically install them if a new update's available. So we're kind of striking out with this capability as well. Most routers, even if you have an older one, chances are you can connect to it with a mobile device or your laptop and update your router's firmware that way. You don't really need to install firmware on a USB and then transfer it to your router through a USB. Before we give up the ship here, all hope is not lost because there's another capability that you can use your USB port for. The capability I'm talking about here is being able to file share over your home network. Essentially, all you have to do, if you put some files on a USB, plug it into the back of your router, then any device on your home network, if you want them to, can access the files on that USB. This can be very handy if you have family photos you want to share, or if you want to share the username and password for the family's Netflix account. There are multiple things you can do here. You can also share movies, legally downloaded movies, of course, but all of these things are opportunities for using the USB port on your router. With that said, I'll walk through the file sharing process here so you can make a determination if you want to move forward and do this with your router or not. The first step is pretty straightforward. You want to take the files or the media that you want to share, put it on the USB, and then we just want to take the USB and plug it into the back of our router. So let's go do that now. I'm going to take the USB, plug it into the back, and now we just have some configuration through your router settings. The next step here is to access your router settings. I'll move through these steps pretty quickly, but if you need a more detailed procedure on how to access your router settings, I've previously made another video that will help you out. I'll link to that up above, so check that out before moving forward. With that said, let's access our router's settings page. I'm going to go to the IP address of my router. On this page, just log in with your username and password for your router settings. From here, we want to go to the Advanced tab. The file sharing can be found under there, so let's go to Advanced. Next, we want to go to USB settings. That's where we find the file sharing settings, so we'll click on that. To start, let's look at the device settings first. Okay, as you can see here, here is your router telling you that it recognizes that a USB is connected to the back of the device. It's telling you right here, here's the volume and the capacity for the USB. Everything looks pretty good here, so let's move on to the next step. Let's look at sharing access. Here on the sharing access page is where you actually have a lot of opportunity to customize the configuration of the files you're sharing. First and foremost, there's an authentication settings option here at the top. Basically what this means is that you can require people to put in a username and password in order to access the files that you're sharing through your router. So here, let's just set one up to test. Let's do use new account, username admin. We're going to pick a password here and we'll click save. So now if people want to access the files on this USB that's connected to my router, they have to put in the username and password. Next is the sharing settings. What I like to do here is I like to share it with my home network only. I definitely don't want to make these files available over the internet. FTP, I don't worry about. I literally just make this available to the devices that are connected to my home network. So we want to save that. Here in this next section is the folder sharing. You can choose to share all the folders on that USB that you connected to your router. So let's do that to try it out first. And then enable authentication. Do we want people to put in that username and password in order to access those files? Let's say yes for now for this test. Okay, so now we should be able to access all the files on the USB using that username and password to get access. The thing you want to make note of here is this TP share. This is what you want to enter in order to get access to these files. I'll show you exactly what this looks like, so let's try this out. All right, so let's see if I can access all the files on that USB drive. We made a note of that location previously. As you can see here, I've typed it in already earlier, but let's type it in, TP share, and then we hit enter. SDA1, this is the name of the USB that's connected to my router. Let's see if we can access it. And here we are, unsurprisingly, we're prompted for credentials. This is the username and password that you identified in that first section of the file sharing settings for your router. So here we just want to type in admin and the password that we selected, click OK. All right, and here we go. We have access to everything on the USB. Looks like we have access to the family accounts page. This is maybe a router firmware version. And we also have access to private do not access. Maybe that's something we don't want to share with everybody. So let's go back and see if we can change our settings to make sure that not everyone can access that. Let's say we only want to share access to our family accounts folder. This includes our Netflix username and password for the family. Let's set that up and see what it looks like. Here, the first thing we have to do, we don't want to share everything, so we're going to toggle this off. Then we have to add exactly what we want to share. So volume name. We're going to share that USB disk, but on that USB disk, we only want to share the family accounts folder. Allow guest network access. I usually turn this off. The people that are connecting to my guest network are usually not as trusted as those that are connecting to my 2.4 and 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi networks. So we'll turn that off for now. And then enable write access and enable media sharing. We'll keep both of those on. Anyone that has access to these folders and these files, I want to give them the opportunity to update them if they need to. One last thing we have to do here, we have to select the name of the folder as it shows up when you try to access the USB that's connected to your router. We just want to call it family accounts. So let's do that, family accounts. And then we'll click save. To confirm, all that's shared down here is that family accounts folder. So let's go see what that looks like when we try to access your USB and the files that are on it. We're going to go back to TP share here. And then there we are. As you can see, we can't see the entire USB device that's connected to the router. We can only see that folder that we created, family accounts, and then in the family accounts folder, there's a file for the passwords for the local Netflix account for the family. So as you can see, everything is working just as we configured it. Another thing I want you to keep in mind here before you put information that's extremely sensitive on a USB that's connected to your router is that even if through your router settings you configure it to require authentication, require someone to put in a username and password, that doesn't change the settings on the local USB itself. For example, if I'm a bad actor, I can go up to that router, pull that USB out, and then I'll be able to access any information on there because all of those restrictions that you're implementing are through your router settings. Hopefully you can find some use for this file sharing using your router and the USB port, but also keep in mind there are a ton of other options today. You can use the cloud for file sharing, network attached storage. There are other options available to you. So this basically brings us to the point of why many routers don't have USB ports today. And that's because all the uses for them pretty much don't really exist anymore. You don't need to connect your printer to your router because they all have wireless technology. You don't need to upgrade your router firmware through a USB device because you can either do it remotely or by connecting a computer or laptop to your router. And then lastly, file sharing. That is very helpful for the local network and the devices in your home network, but at the same time, there are other options available as well. If you have any questions about this information or about the uses for the USB port on your router, please drop a comment below. If this information was either eye-opening or useful for you, please give the video a like. That way it will get shared with other people who can benefit as well from this information. And lastly, if you like the content I'm putting out on my channel, I invite you to subscribe and come along for the ride. I'll have plenty more useful tips and tricks here as we progress. As always, thanks for checking out this episode from Network from Home, and we'll catch you on the next one.